Reagan won with a great deal of support of Democrats, the so-called Reagan Democrats.
Right.
And the Republicans who voted for Republican Ronald Reagan, in many cases, were doing so over the objection of the Republican leadership. Reagan was not the favored candidate of the Republican leadership at the time. So what do we have coming into the 2016 election? We have a lot of Democrats who I think are appalled at the extreme left-wing tilt of the Democratic Party.
I agree with that.
I think we see a lot of workers who are going to say, you know, those union leaders who continue to contribute to hard left-wing Democrat causes are not representing me, the worker. I think a lot of the Republicans are saying the candidates, the establishment candidates the Republicans are putting up are not really representing the wishes of the Republican rank and file. I think they're ready for a change. I think both parties are ready for a change. I think you're seeing that in some of the numbers for Hillary Clinton. I enjoy watching the left-wing Democrats go into paroxysms trying to say, well, Hillary isn't left-wing enough. Left-wing enough? I mean, left-wing of what? Karl Marx? And they're saying that's why she has to tilt to the left. New York's Mayor Bill de Blasio keeps saying, well, I don't know, I have to see, maybe she's not progressive enough for me.
You know, progressive is just another word for socialist.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
And that's one of the things if honesty means anything to the voter, conservative candidates tend to proudly say, I'm conservative. Left-wing candidates try to pretend there's something else altogether for the most part.
Have you ever noticed, too, that when conservatives talk about the country, it's, I believe in America. I believe in the American way. I'm proud to fly the flag, to call myself American. Yet you have the other side, and they're disparaging. They're destroying the flag, the symbols of this country. They're talking about wanting to make us like other nations, and the nations that they want to make us like are ones that are not practicing human rights. There's no equality there. There's dictatorships, authoritarian regimes, and these are what the extreme left is holding up as the model. It's really, they're really proposing the destruction, and it is the way that the president did describe it, the transformation of America. They're really talking about the destruction of the American way. So it's very frustrating right now, but I think we're going to see some very positive changes because American people are not stupid.
Well, one of the things all that has led to, of course, is the astounding deficit in the federal government. We have a federal debt of about $18 trillion, and each year that deficit, we have an annual deficit that keeps getting larger and larger. One of the...
That's true. We are seeing our numbers go up and up and up in the way of deficits.
One of the people, of course, who has been on top of that has been former Congressman Joe Diaguardi. He's one of America's foremost experts on the federal budget. His book, Unaccountable Congress, spells out in vivid details the shortcomings of Washington's financial problems. He's a certified public accountant. He is uniquely well positioned to speak on the deficit and debt crisis facing America today. And we're about to get him on the line, and he's going to tell us a bit about when he was in Congress and also in the years since, what his views on the federal debt are. You know, when President Obama first took office, the federal debt, I believe, was $10.7 trillion. And that included everything from 1776 to 2008. Now, in $10.7 trillion. Now, in the mere 6 years or so that President Obama has been in office, we have increased from $10.7 trillion to, I believe it's $18 trillion.
And counting.
And counting, right.
We still haven't learned not to add more to it.
And, you know, one of the things that's most disturbing to me about that, you know, if somehow for that great increase in the debt, we had somehow gained something, if the United States was safer and more secure than it ever was before, if our people were more prosperous, if our infrastructure had been rebuilt, if we were, you know, really creating more jobs, I would say that's okay. But that is not what's happened. All that money has been spent, and we've gotten nothing out of it. As I said before, we are very happy to have former Congressman Joe Diaguardi with us. Congressman Diaguardi, how are you? Whoops.
I think we lost him on that.
We lost him again.
Check the number.
Well, you know what's one thing they can tell that this is a real show, that it's not made up, because
that's for sure, yeah.
Maybe the telephone, they always say about the telephone company being this big conspiracy. Maybe they don't want to get him on the air with us to really talk about the true facts of what's happening. But, Frank, it is very discouraging when you see such numbers growing, because when you take that money away from the American people, and that's exactly what it's doing, it's taking it out of the hands of the private sector, the nonprofit sector.
We talked about in a previous show the $22 trillion that was spent on the war on poverty that hasn't reduced poverty. Think what that $22 trillion could have done if left in the private sector, creating jobs, creating opportunity for people. $2 trillion is a heck of a lot of money. And if we left it in the private sector as opposed to the federal government, we really could have seen an explosion in this economy. Congressman, do we have you with us now?
Yeah, I'm on. How you doing, Frank?
Joe, it's great to be with you again.
I'm happy that you called me. I've missed you for a while, but I have been speaking around the country, and people are starting to wake up that we're spending money we don't have, we're borrowing from countries we don't trust, and we may be giving up the American dream in the process.
Joe, one of the things that we were talking about has been that, we have a debt of $18 trillion, an increase from $10.7 trillion back in 2008. And yet for all those dollars spent, a vast amount, the country has gained absolutely nothing. What happened to those dollars?
First of all, you're talking about the cash basis national debt, $18 trillion. In fact, we're just up at what they call the debt line, the debt limit line, and now they're trying to figure out how to defer it a little bit, playing all kinds of accounting games. It's like a shell game going on down in Washington. So we got an issue. But that is the least of our problems. That doesn't account the entitlements. You've got another approximately $60 trillion of things that we have obligated ourselves to that have to be paid because they've been promised, like Social Security and Medicare and even Medicaid. These are all mandatory expenditures, and that's our big problem. And to tell you why it's not being resolved, look what happened just recently. We had the doc fix. We're saying that we need to now increase the amounts of money that go to doctors. We had the tax extenders. These are various kinds of tax so-called deductions or loopholes that they had to put back in. They only defer them a year at a time. And some of them are very good. But the problem is they didn't raise the money for these things. In other words, they're not paid for. They're just adding it to the national debt, borrowing. And that's not what we should be doing. We've gotten too used to spending money by borrowing. And this is what's going to be a big problem for our future. It's a big problem right now. It would be bigger except the Fed has dumbed down interest rates to practically zero, so nobody's feeling the impact of all this debt. But you can be sure that when we let the free market work again to set interest rates, the interest rates are going to go easily back to 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And when that happens, we're going to be in trouble because interest right now is very, very low. And, interest is like mandatory spending, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. It's got to be paid. In fact, when you add interest to the mandatory spending of 65% of our budget, interest is 6%. That leaves you 29% that is discretionary.
Congressman, let me jump in there for 1 second. You mentioned very low interest rates. Doesn't that, in many ways, when the Fed keeps the interest rates artificially low, doesn't that hurt our senior citizens in many ways?
Absolutely. There's no question. We've transferred a huge amount of wealth in this country from those who save and those who are on pensions to others. And, a lot of those older people are not rich people. They're in the middle class. Some of them just have Social Security. And this has created that gap that we keep talking about between the richest people in America and the poorest. There's no question.
Well, Congressman, before you came on today, Frank and I were talking on the air about how the next generation probably isn't going to be doing as well as the current generation for the first time in history. But we're also seeing something else happen, I think, for the first time, and that's a huge expansion of all these aid programs that makes it virtually impossible for people to get off of the government dole, if you will, even when they're very healthy and can go to work, because if they don't accept that and they take a minimum wage job just to get into the job market, their families are going to suffer. Do you think that we can change that given the vast numbers that are now on the poverty rolls or on the government dole today?
It's especially true here in New York. It seems like more people come here for benefits than they do to get a job. Our economy isn't, in New York City it may be really good, but it's not that good around the state. But if you look at the country as a whole, there is no doubt that we have not created the kind of spending to create growth and jobs. What we've done is we've given people fish rather than teaching them how to fish. I think Maimonides said that, the great Jewish philosopher. And that seems to be the political way to do things, the easy way out, because today, if you please people today, you get their vote. If you try to please the people that are coming down the track 10, 20 years from now, many of them are not of voting age now. They may be later. Many of them are not even here. So the politicians say, well, let me worry about getting reelected. Let me see what I can do to help these people now and close my eyes to the future, and maybe we'll grow out of it later on. I mean, it is a charade what is going on today. And the next generation is going to inherit an unholy mess when interest rates start going up, because we have created a country that's more intent on politics today than it is on growth.
I think you're very correct, and I think also Americans tend to have a very short-term look at things. So we think, okay, well, we're spending a little bit more, but in the future it'll be just fine, and we don't look at things the way we should, which I think is with some more long-term planning. If we extend the congressional budget window projection beyond 10 years, we could have a more accurate accounting of the real cost of legislation. Do you think we could get Congress to do that, where they actually are responsible beyond the end of their term?
It's a very difficult thing to do, but we need to put in place the systems, especially the right accounting system. I've been calling for that now for 28 years, when I was in Congress, and then when I left and I started Truth in Government. It's very difficult to get long-term planning in the U.S. government, but corporations have to do it. They have, chief financial officers that know what to do. They have audit committees. They have independent auditors. They use the right accounting system. They didn't. The SEC would indict them for securities fraud if they were publicly traded corporations. We need to adopt some of these private sector safeguards on government. It's happening little by little. As you may have heard, the Government Accounting Standards Advisory Board, which is the one that deals with accounting principles for the states, now requires, as the fiscal years ended June 30th, 2015, that's this year, that all unfunded liabilities have to be now recorded on financial statements. Who do you think is pushing for that? The rating services, because they don't want to get burned later when they find out they gave AAA ratings to states and counties and whatnot and found out that they were way underwater on their pensions. And we know they are. Now, we know they are, but it's not easy to see if you don't put it on the statements, the financial statements. So we have a problem, and I remember when I was in Arthur Anderson, we prepared a booklet called Fiscal Responsibility in America. And in that booklet, there was a great quote that politicians today, and today was back then in 1986, are currying favor with today's voters at the expense of tomorrow's taxpayers. So this is what's going on. They're really wanting to get the vote, and to get a vote today is easy when you're giving away something. And we've now got to get America wise to what's going on. We need a new constituency on Main Street that is talking back to Congress and the powers to be, as I did many times. I've spoken truth to power. Maybe that's why I'm not in Congress at this point. and you need to do this, but it can't be just a lone wolf. And back then I was a lone wolf. I'm not anymore. So many people a guy called me from Texas. He heard from someone who heard me speak 2 weeks ago in front of the American Accounting Association in Washington.